Happy Friday, everyone. This is Chris Black. I'm a manager with LendingTree's Talent Acquisition. This is our interview training webinar. Let's get started. But before we do, let's make sure our attorneys are happy. All information is based on our opinions. It is intended solely to provide generally applicable information and should not be understood as a guarantee or assurance of future success in any manner. Before we get going, there is a Q&A button at the bottom. We're going to be answering questions at the end, but I recommend entering your questions as they come up. Don't feel that you have to save them to the end to put them in there. So here's what we're going to cover. We're going to cover things in really chronological order, starting with how do you get an interview. We're going to talk about how to prepare for an interview, how to actually handle the interview, and lastly, the follow-up and salary negotiations. Let's first start with why this is really so important. One of the main reasons is that you, of course, want to avoid long periods of time where you're not employed on your resume. There's a lot of companies that unfortunately view that as a big negative. They view it as you're someone that other companies don't want to hire, and that's, I think, a mistake on the part of a lot of companies. That's unfortunately the reality that we live in. The fact of the matter is also that for every month that you're not employed, you're losing out on money that you cannot recoup. So let's look at the math. Say you're making $50,000 per year, typically. You're losing out on what would be $3,000 per month net. And obviously, you can extrapolate that out. If you typically make $100,000 per year, you're losing out on $6,000 per month net. So really no small numbers. And lastly, you really do not want to put yourself in a position where you're just accepting a job from a company because really they're the only company offering you a position. You want to be in the driver's seat as much as possible. You want to work for the type of company that you want to work for, doing the type of work that you really want to do. Let's look up some numbers. We're actually going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. 250, it's the number of applicants per job. So obviously you want to put yourself in the best light possible. These three numbers after that are really what I want to focus on. So 60% of positions out there are filled by a connection at the company. So most people think of this, they would think of a referral, an employee referral. It would include that, but it would include other things as well. 30% of positions are filled by online applications. So this would be applying to a company directly through their website, certainly applying to a company through Indeed and other websites like that. 10%, that's the number of positions that are filled by recruiting companies. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further. The reason I want to focus on this is that most people, when they're unemployed, are spending their time in that 30% range of applying for positions on Indeed and to companies directly on their website. And that's really a mistake because they're missing out on a lot of other things they can be doing. And keep in mind that top number, 250, if you're only spending your time applying for positions like everybody else, you're right in the mix with another 249 people. You want to do whatever you can to get your name to the top of the pile. My recommendation is that when you're spending your time, your 8 hours a day trying to find a job, that you use this as a guide to how you spend your time. And we're going to be talking about each one step by step. First of all, let's start with applying online. It's the most common, it's what most people think about. Most people will see a job, let's say on Indeed, that they may be qualified for, and they quickly fire off their resume. I think that's a mistake. The first thing that you should do if you see a position that you're qualified for is see if you have any connections at all at the company. The way you do this is by using LinkedIn. So you go to LinkedIn, you see, for example, who the hiring might be depending on the position you're applying for. You may be able to figure out who at least the head of that area is. If you're applying for, let's say, an accounts payable analyst position, well, maybe you'll be able to find out who's head of accounts payable at that company and try to connect with them directly. Short of that, try to find someone at the company that you have something in common with. It could be that you went to the same school. It could be that you worked at a previous company. Even though you didn't know each other, you still have that connection. Or it could be, and you can very easily see this on LinkedIn, see if you have any people that you know in common that you might be able to leverage, and then reach out to those people directly. Now, let's say that you don't have any connections, you can't find anything at all. Yes, still, of course, absolutely apply for the position online. Most people don't do this nowadays, but I recommend including a cover letter. It should be brief. Cover letters that are multiple paragraphs long typically are not read, but if you can include 1 or 2 reasons why you're a good fit for the position and 1 or 2 reasons why you're interested in the position, that's something that a hiring manager and recruiter is really going to appreciate. Then also, I would do some kind of follow-up. Keep in mind all the candidates that you're competing against. It's easy to get lost in the shuffle. And so really what I'm talking about here is maybe 1 email a week after you apply and maybe another email a week after that. Beyond that, I would not keep rating people at the company with email after email. I would just leave it at those 2 and then move on. Let's talk about recruiters because they can be invaluable. There's really 2 types of recruiters. There's the in-house recruiters, which is typically my position. It's been called talent acquisition at most companies for the past 8 to 12 years. This is going to be the first contact typically that you're going to have with a company. They may reach out to you after looking over your resume. They'll typically set up a time to talk with you over the phone to see if you're a good fit for a position. And if they don't think you're a good fit for the position, the fact is you're not going to move forward in the process. They're a critical part in helping you get the job that you want to get. Secondly, there's recruiters, often with the same job title. They work separately at recruiting firms. These are firms that are set up solely and get paid solely to help companies find good candidates. And there's really 2 types. There's contingency, which as the name implies, they get paid contingent upon one of their candidates getting placed at a company. These are the most common types of recruiting firms that are out there. The other type is a retained search firm. And the retained search firm will get paid a fee in order to hire a particular candidate. Typically, these are positions at a minimum of $150,000 per year. Often the minimum is $250,000 per year. But also, as that name implies, they are paid a retainer. That search firm, that recruiting firm is paid a retainer in order to find a candidate. Very often they're vetting internal candidates, but they're getting a fee whether that person is found through that search firm or not. And those are the 2 types that are most common. What happens is typically is that recruiting firm, be it contingent or retained, is going to find candidates and then submit them to the in-house recruiters, the talent acquisition department that I just described, and then the process would start from there. Let's talk about connecting with people. And this is a great way to find a position. Quite honestly, it's very easy, but it's also very difficult. It's very easy because all you're doing is sending your resume to people that you know and telling them what you're interested in. It's difficult because it can be humbling. It may take putting pride aside and reaching out to an old manager, let's say, old coworkers that you haven't talked to in a long time, letting them know that you're actively looking, maybe even that you're unemployed, and then you're letting them know what it is that you're looking for. I'm going to show you here an example of how it worked out for someone who is looking and reached out to someone they really didn't know that well, and that they end up getting a job from it. But this is actually very common for people to reach out to people, and it results in a number of degrees away from the company, but they end up finding the job that they really want, the job that they're really looking for. Let's go to an example. So this candidate, and this is a real life example, this candidate was connected with the friend, what I have here is friend connector. And really it was a one-time dinner that was just by chance that candidate went over to this connector's house for dinner, and they didn't talk after that. Except 4 months later, this candidate was actively looking for a position, and they sent their resume to a bunch of people that they know. And one thing I will mention about sending this type of email and sending your resume along is that it's really best to be specific in what you're looking for. It's counterintuitive. You may think, hey, if I'm looking for anything, you're casting a broad net, that would be better. It's really not. What you want to do is talk about your experience. Again, it's a brief email. Your experience, maybe you have 5 years in accounts payable, and you're looking for an accounts payable that has management, a position in accounts payable that has management responsibilities. And then you're basically thanking the person for their time, thanking them for forwarding it on to anybody that they may know. So in this example, this candidate, 4 months go by, and he's reaching out to a bunch of people. He sends it to this connector. This person is friends with a recruiter, actually a person that owns his own recruiting firm. They know each other because they train for triathlons together, which is why he's swimming. That recruiter, just by chance, happened to know about an opening at LendingTree. And so the recruiter connected with the person within HR, the recruiter, and very quickly this person ended up with a job at LendingTree. It started as a contract position, but they ended up being hired full-time. Now, I imagine it wasn't easy for that candidate to reach out to somebody that they barely knew and hadn't talked to in 4 months, and because it was just kind of an out of the blue email. But here's an example of how these things really do work. Let's talk about connecting with companies. And if you are employed, I highly recommend that this be the major part of your strategy. And that is setting up a plan with 20 to 30 companies. I say 20 would be the bare minimum. And these are companies that you've researched, companies that you really would like to work for, companies that you know are growing, and at some point sooner than later would likely have a need for someone in your position. And so what you want to do is reach out to people at the company. And again, this could be anyone, whether you know them or not. This could be people, as I mentioned before, people that went to the same school that you went to, people that worked at the same company that you worked at in the past. You have common connections, or it could be that they just happen to work in the same department that you want to work for. And all you're doing is sending them an email. Usually you can find someone's work email address online. If not, you should send them a LinkedIn message with your resume, which you can attach your resume to LinkedIn messages. And again, this is a very brief, very specific message in that, very briefly, you have X number of years experience or even months, or maybe you're a recent college grad. And this is the type of position that you're looking for. Again, being specific is the best way to go. It can be counterintuitive, but once someone knows what you're looking for, they're in a better position to help you. They know who they can send your resume to. And lastly, as part of this plan, I'll show you an example of an Excel spreadsheet of how you can monitor this in the next slide. But really, you want to have a plan with set goals. And maybe the goal is sending out 6 messages a day or following up with X number of people per day. But that's going to help you keep on track. So let's look at this example. So my recommendation is you set it up with 20 companies along the far left-hand side, and then listing the people that you're trying to connect with next to each one. And I would also have a separate Word document for companies where things start to progress. If you get a phone screen, you certainly have an interview where you're really able to take a bunch of notes and you're able to, that you can refer to later. But this also at the very dates across the top are activities by week. And if you notice that a week or two has gone by and you haven't connected with anybody at one of your target companies, it's glaringly obvious that you should take those steps to connect with them in some way. But this can be a great format for that. Let's talk about once you get an interview, how do you prepare for it? The number one thing that you can do is practice your answers to common interview questions. And just let's think about an example. If I were to ask you just right now, each and every one of you, tell me a time where you faced an ethical challenge in the workplace. You could probably come up with something. It may take a minute or two, but you could probably come up with something. Now think about if you worked on that and asked yourself that same question every day for a week, and you refined your answer, and you more importantly refined how you presented the answer, you're going to do a much better job after 6 or 7 rounds. Now think about doing this with 20, 30, 40, 50 different questions. You're going to be really prepared for an interview. And they may not ask you that specific question that you happen to study, but if you spend the time practicing dozens of interview questions, you're much more likely to have something similar to what they're asking, and you're going to be able to nail that question every single time. I can't stress enough how important this really is. You do want to research absolutely everything you can about the company and also the people you're interviewing with. I recommend only bringing up things during the interview if you found something you find in common with the person that you found on LinkedIn. So if you found something on Facebook and it's in their news feed from 2014, do not bring it up. The best thing is just to stick to LinkedIn when it comes to things like that. But the more you know about the people you're going to be meeting with, the more comfortable you're going to be, the more confident you're going to seem. Before you go into the actual interview, you want to remind yourself of your accomplishments. And so let's say one of the questions is, well, how much do you have experience staging up servers? And you might say, yeah, I have 18 months experience. How much better would it be if you referred to your notes beforehand, you received the same question, and you said, I have 18 months experience setting up servers, and actually I set up 7 servers, 4 of which were in the cloud. Like, it's just much more professional, higher level answer that's more likely to get you the position. Let's talk about your arrival time. If it happens to be in person, which is unlikely in this environment, you should arrive 10 minutes early. And I would really map that out. You don't want to arrive 20 minutes early, certainly don't want to arrive 2 minutes early, but I would think through if there's a parking garage involved, obviously you want to allow time for traffic, whatever that may be, but 10 minutes is a good rule of thumb, and then logging in 5 minutes early if it's going to be a video interview. And let's talk about video interviews because most likely that's what it's going to be for at least the next several months. So here's what you should do. Certainly the day before, you want to go set up your computer, and it may involve putting a book or two underneath your laptop so that you have the right angle. You want to look at what's behind you, make sure nothing is embarrassing and that it does look professional. Think about the angle as I just mentioned, and also think about the lighting. You don't want to be too bright or too dark. You do want to wear interview clothes. Some people will tell you, oh, only worry about the waist up, but I disagree. I think there's something to be said for putting on your full interview attire. I think there's a certain amount of confidence that comes from that. And the fact is, you just never know if something goes wrong, you might have to stand up. And how embarrassing would that be? And so I recommend putting on everything that you would wear to a normal interview. And lastly, I would test and retest everything, make sure all your connections are very strong so that nothing is likely to go wrong. Let's talk about the actual interview itself. The first thing you want to do is smile. It puts people at ease. It makes people feel more comfortable. And yes, you want to smile when you first meet the person, but also at the end and also in the middle. I wouldn't spend the whole time smiling, of course, but it's something that you really want to put an effort into it. It's one of those things, especially when you're nervous, that it may not be something that would come to mind, but it's something you definitely want to do. You do want to look the person in the eye. In this day and age, that probably means looking at the camera, but just like you're talking with someone face to face, you don't want to stare in the camera the entire time. You do want to sit upright, even though you're on video, just like you'd be sitting upright in a normal interview situation. And you do want to be authentic. Now, this does mean that you should not exaggerate your accomplishments in any way, but it also means that if there's something that may be presumed as a negative about your background, that it's okay to bring that up. Like it shows someone that that you're being genuine, in that the person on the other side of the interview can trust you, which means they can trust the positives that you're bringing up. And also with that level of trust, the interviewer is likely to talk openly about the positives and negatives of the position. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. A lot of people, and I've seen this a whole bunch over the years, when they get a little bit nervous, they start to fidget and they start to, touch their face and touch their hair, and it's kind of this continual thing through the interview. If you're that type of person, you want to avoid that at all costs, because that nervous energy comes across to the interviewer, and it's hard for everyone to relax. So if you're that type of person, highly recommend either just putting your hands in your lap or crossing your hands and just kind of sitting there calmly. Lastly, you definitely want to take notes. This shows that you're a high-level professional. You don't want to take copious notes the entire interview, but when the interviewer says something or asks something meaningful, you do want to write it down. And part of this is because, as mentioned before, you want to put yourself in a position where you're choosing the company as much as they're choosing you. And for that reason, you want to keep track of each of the interviews at the different companies they're interviewing with. So it's just a sign of professionalism when you go to the interview. And let me make a note about taking notes. What I recommend is bringing in a notepad, just typically in a leather leather binder. And before you go to the interview, that you write the name at the top of each person that you're going to be talking with. And then you write questions beforehand that you're going to ask that person. I would also leave room for notes on that page. In a perfect world, the questions that you're going to be asking will be based on something the interviewer said, but short of that, you still want to ask questions. I have that on the next slide. So as the interviewer is asking you questions, you do want to limit the responses to really 3 or 4 sentences. And that's really for 2 reasons. One, beyond 3 or 4 sentences, it's proven that people start to lose touch with what you're saying. They're not paying attention as much as you want them to. And also, beyond 3 or 4 sentences, you're likely starting to get off topic at that point. If the interviewer wants some clarification, absolutely, they're going to ask you a follow-up question. But this is one of the things that you should be careful of. Very often, I hear from hiring managers that they were only able to ask 2 or 3 questions during the whole interview because the candidate kept going on and on and on and on. Partly that's the interviewer's fault for not cutting them off, but that's one of those things that you should definitely be aware of. As I mentioned a moment ago, definitely ask questions. And I would ask thoughtful questions, things that you're genuinely concerned about, but I would not ask questions that require, 10, 15 minutes to answer, do some kind of SWOT analysis, SWOT. Like that's not the type of question that's appropriate for especially a first round of interviews. But you also want to be careful that the questions that you're asking really are not benefits related questions. That will come when you have the offer. You can address those issues then. At this point, you're mostly concerned about you evaluating the company and putting your best foot forward so you actually get the highest offer possible. Let's talk about the follow-up and salary negotiations. So as far as email timing, and this is one of those things too that can be a great differentiator because most people aren't doing this nowadays. What I recommend, and most people recommend, is that the day after or the evening of the interview, you send out an email to everyone that you met with. And I would mention something specifically in each one that was talked about during your time with them. After that, I recommend only sending emails to the hiring manager and the recruiter you're connecting with. And even then, I recommend only doing it the week after and then 3 weeks after. And this is, of course, assuming that the company hasn't reached out to you. And I would not, even if you haven't heard back from the company, I would not continue to pester them. That might put you in a category of someone that they don't want to talk with in the future. And it could be a whole myriad of reasons why they haven't gotten in touch with you. Maybe there's a problem with funding for the position. Maybe they're actually considering you for a higher level position at the company. It could be any of a number of things, but I would limit the follow-up to those 3 things. Know your value. Know the position you're interested in and what the likely salary is for that position, given the city that you're living in. And there's several ways to go about this. I listed Glassdoor, I listed FLC Data Center as well, and they're very good. But I feel the best way is to talk with people in that field. It is very, very simple. I would just ask, say you're someone, I'll go back to the accounts payable position. Say you're someone with 5 years of accounts payable experience. I would talk to somebody in accounts payable and say, based on my understanding, someone with 5 years of accounts payable experience should be getting X, let's talk a number, should be getting $75,000 per year. Do you think that's high or do you think that's low? You do this 4, 5, 6 times with people that are in the industry, that are in that field, you're going to get a really good idea as far as what a position is likely to pay. It's going to be very valuable when it comes time to negotiate. One thing I would stay away from when it comes to negotiating is coming up with a number that is too high. If you're, say, 25% over the number that you were offered, that company likely, for one, is not going to come up at that level. But 2, they may come up a little bit, but they may also think in the back of your mind that even if they come up, you're likely not to be happy with that number. And you're likely to either not perform well or not stay with them for very long. Now, if your value is in fact 25, 30% over that number and you're confident you can get that somewhere, then absolutely feel free to use that. But very often that's not the case. And then also during the salary negotiations, there's sometimes things that are talked about. For example, you'll receive a 3% raise within 6 months. It could be any number of things. It could be a title change, could be a number of vacation days. If it's not in writing, it doesn't matter. So any of the things that are sometimes on the periphery that are discussed during the salary negotiations, make sure you get that in writing. I can't stress that enough. Let's talk about additional suggestions. So one is that you don't want to wing it when it comes to trying to find a job. You want to wake up every day, spend 8 hours a day looking for the type of job that you want to have, and you want to have a game plan when you go about it. You also want to leverage the people that you know. If you really start thinking about it, if you were forced to come up with a list of, say, 60, 70 people, you could do that. And I highly recommend doing that very thing and then reaching out to them. And then also, I spent many years working with different career ministries in the Charlotte area, different churches. And I can tell you one of the main things that will influence how quickly you find a job is your attitude. You have to be looking forward. You have to be looking at what is your future career going to be. There's so many people that kind of get caught up in the fact that they were the ones that got laid off. And there's so many other people that are still at the company that really should have gotten laid off before them. That's what they think about. And that's not mentally healthy. That's not going to help you get a job as quickly as you want to get it. These are the references. And now let's move on to Q&A. It looks like we have some already set up. So first question, will you be able to send the recording to us after? Yes, we will. I can't promise when that will get sent out, but yes, we'll definitely send that out. What are some things you recommend to stand out as a candidate? Can you provide an example of something you've seen work? So some I already mentioned during the presentation. The follow-up emails certainly can be one of them. Just spending that time on research and practicing your questions beforehand really does make a big difference. I didn't talk about this as much as I should have, but there's a lot of research that shows how you present yourself during an interview, how confident you are, how articulate you are, is equally important as the amount of the type of content that you're saying. So I would spend time not only practicing the content of your answers, but practicing how you present your answers. And what should you wear and bring to an interview? It depends on the company. So if you're going to work for a bank, I would go with suit and tie. If you're going to interview with LendingTree, it really doesn't matter to us. So as far as what to wear, it just depends on the company. And there's certainly nothing wrong with asking the recruiter what would be appropriate. As far as what to bring, I did mention bringing a paper tablet and then also putting that in some kind of leather binder that you just walk in with. And I would bring a couple pens in case one dies. And then I talked about the layout of what you should do for each page, depending on who you're meeting with. All right. And then someone else is asking for the video. Someone else is asking, what if they don't get a response from the company? And this is difficult, especially if you've gone through the interview process. And I agree, you're absolutely entitled to a response. The fact of the matter is that we're all human, and sometimes things do fall through the cracks. As an example, 1 year at LendingTree, I filled 62 positions. At the same time, I oversaw the immigration for LendingTree, and I oversaw all the college recruiting and the summer internship program. I'd like to say no one fell through the cracks during that time, but that probably wouldn't be fair. So it's something that I would say, yes, it's difficult to have to face, but also, as I mentioned during the presentation, it's nothing that you should press too hard, because if you keep pressing, you'll get an answer, and the answer is going to be no. And I hate to say it, but you probably eliminated yourself from working for that company in the future. So I would take the steps that I recommended and then just move forward from there. But hopefully companies are good at following up with you. How do you approach a company where you do not have a contact? First of all, I would try to find one, as I mentioned before. Short of that, I would reach out to someone on the recruiting team. Now, the recruiters at LendingTree are going to be in favor of this, so maybe I'm talking about other companies. But I would reach out just so that you know your resume is getting looked at. Again, this is something that's, you don't want to have a long email, or if it's LinkedIn, a long in-mail. But you do want to get to the point very quickly. Hey, I just want to make sure that you saw my resume. I applied for X position. And then it's one of the things you have to move on. Let me go through questions here. Do you have some basic suggestions for prioritizing potential employers? There are many out there. It can be difficult to filter out. Yeah, it can be. Again, this comes down to doing a lot of research, and a lot of comes down to what you really want. There's some people that absolutely thrive at massively large companies, and there's some people that absolutely thrive at companies with less than 50 employees. Learn about the different types of companies out there, the different roles, because they matter. The types of roles at those two different types of companies are drastically different. You head up accounts payable for a Fortune 500 company, drastically different than heading up accounts payable at a 50-person company. You have to know yourself well enough to know what's going to be a good fit for you. Those should be your target companies. And also industries do matter. Let's see, next question. Can interviewer ask for any existing offer in hand to the interviewee? Yes. So they can ask, where, and that's probably something, honestly, an interviewer, well, maybe not an interviewer, but at least somebody in recruiting, I think should ask, where do you stand with other companies? Because if you have an existing offer in hand, as the question stated, then that company should know they need to move fast. They need to move very quickly if they want to hire you as an employee. So they need to get an offer to you very quickly, but there's nothing illegal about asking that question. There's plenty of legal questions out there. That's not one of them. Now, you can refuse to answer if you want, but it's up to you. How would you approach finding a job in another location? A candidate is looking to relocate. First of all, at the top of the resume, I would put willing to relocate. If you're going to relocate to a specific city and you know that you're going to relocate to a specific city, I don't think there's anything wrong with putting that city at the top of the resume, assuming you're willing to pay for your own relocation. If not, then I would put your current city and then maybe parenthetically put willing to relocate. But that's something that I would address up front. And I would make sure you do that, because if you, let's say you live in Raleigh and you're willing to move or want to move to Atlanta, if you put just your Raleigh address, the recruiter may call up your resume and say, oh, this person made a mistake for applying for a position in Atlanta, because they obviously live in Raleigh and they're likely not to move. So definitely I would mention that on your resume, and maybe even during your follow-up with the company, or when you initially reach out to them. Let's see, do you think informational interviews have value as part of the search strategy? So I imagine what you're talking about is when an employer, as part of what I do for my job, goes to a college and they talk about the company, the different positions that are available. Almost always during the informational interviews, there's kind of there's a Q&A, but also there's time to mix and mingle afterwards. I've found that the mix and mingle time afterwards is most valuable for the candidates, where they get a chance to talk with people from the company about the different roles. What I've done is, especially when it's very broad-based, I'm talking to a bunch of different majors, I typically bring employees from different departments that can talk to candidates, talk to students about different positions at the company, depending on the student's interest, what field they're interested in. So it can be valuable, extremely valuable from that point of view. I'll also say, as a student, it's a great way to learn about a bunch of different companies. And companies can be very, very different. You can have a very, very different experience at company A compared to company B, and getting to know them through those informational interviews can be extremely, extremely valuable. That is it. Those are all the questions I have. So we will be sending out a follow-up email that it will have the video link to this. I imagine also we'll be able to include the video link to the webinar that we did 2 weeks ago on how to create a great resume. We're also going to include a link to our AMA form, Ask Me Anything form. That's going to be up and through the end of June. So if you do have a question that we didn't ask, please do click on that link and ask us a question. We'll definitely answer it for you. I appreciate everybody logging in today. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks.